Well, Shannon, it is an absolute honor to have you on the You're Not Alone podcast today. Thank you so much for giving myself and my audience a little bit of your time today. As we kick off today's episode, I have a few areas that I want to dive into. I want to talk about panic attacks today. I want to talk about agoraphobia. But before we dive into that, will you just take a brief minute here and give my audience a quick introduction on yourself?
Yeah, of course. Hi, Zach. Thank you for having me, and I'm so excited to talk to you and your community. So my name is Shannon Jackson. I'm a mom. I am an adventurer. I am an anxiety recovery coach. And how I got here is pretty amazing, because if you were to ask me 10, 15 years ago, I would say, you're crazy. That will never happen.
Yeah.
I was just trying to survive. So I struggled with anxiety, panic disorder, and agoraphobia for 15 years. I started struggling when I was a teenager, and it was really rough. And I worked for a long time trying to figure out how to get better, and did all the things and tried all the tools, and just, it was a really hard journey. And I say that I'm an adventurer because I am. And although I did a lot of adventuring while I was struggling, it didn't look how it does now. It's really nice to be at a place where I can do the things and I'm not filled with anxiety, panic, and fear. But I always say the adventure part is awesome, but when you recover from something like panic disorder and agoraphobia, the more awesome part is just being able to do the daily stuff, like putting gas in your car, going to the store, and not being filled with a bunch of what ifs and panic attacks and fear and worrying about having panic attacks. So yeah, I recovered roughly 7 years ago, and it was around the time that I had my daughter. She's now 4.5. But I had my daughter, and I just thought, I was working in healthcare. I had been in it for a long time, and I just thought, I got to do something else. And I want to do something else, but I don't know what.
Yeah.
And it was kind of crazy. I was talking to a friend, and he was like, well, you like writing. Why don't you start writing? And I thought, what am I even going to write about?
Yeah.
And it was just so crazy that when I sat down and thought about it, I'm like, gosh, I went through so much, and I could help a lot of people. And why don't I just start a blog? Why don't I just start writing about it and just see where it takes me? And gosh, it started 3 years ago with writing the blog, and then it morphed into all the things today, my podcast and coaching and my programs, and it's just been a whirlwind. And like I said, if you had told me that this is what I would be doing, I would tell you you're crazy, because I would have done anything to get away from anxiety and never, ever talk about it again.
Yes.
And now I talk about it every day, and I love it, and I love what I do. So yeah, that's kind of how I landed here, but obviously there's so much in between.
Yeah, and I have some questions for you about what you brought up. It is interesting, though. I'll tell you, Shannon, I have my own journey and story of getting to where I'm at today in terms of, I would have done anything in the world to get rid of OCD, to never have it again, to never have to talk about it. I had thoughts of man, I wish there was a brain transplant, give me a new brain, anything to never have to feel anxiety or depression or anything ever again. That was even at, let's see, I was diagnosed in 2016, and that was my reality for many, many years, until I had a mentor come into my life and was basically hey, would you be open to sharing your story with, this is all started and still is a core part of my business, which is talking to college students about mental health and educating them. But when he first brought that up, I was like, no, no, this is my thing. This is my little story and my own little thing that I've been through and that I'm learning to cope with. And nobody else needs to know about this. So I resonate with that. I truly never thought that this would be the path that I'm on, but and I'm sure you can relate to this, I have found so much meaning in this work because I know what it feels like to struggle with those symptoms, and I know what people go through on a daily basis, and I can really picture what that feels like. And now that I'm, on my path to recovery, just like you, I feel energized to give people the resources that I wish I would have had to start on that journey. So I resonate with that so much, and I'm really glad that you mentioned that and shared that part of your story, because I think it's important. I want to talk about the panic attacks, but I'm curious about agoraphobia. Can you explain what that is to my audience?
Yeah. So agoraphobia, I think, is a term that is really misunderstood in a lot of ways. I think you hear the term agoraphobia and you automatically think people have trouble leaving their house. And although it can look that way for some people, and it does look that way, more at the crux of agoraphobia is you have a fear of panicking. You have a fear of feeling trapped, feeling stuck, something embarrassing happening, like you just feeling really uncomfortable and not being able to get away from it, like to have an escape per se.
Yeah.
So I say, I've always been an adventurer. For me, it didn't ever look like being housebound. For some people, they can be agoraphobic and be housebound, meaning they don't leave their house, or they leave their house and go very short distances. For me, I really didn't have that. I still went to school. I went to college. I traveled. I moved across the country. Like, I did all these things. And so I think on the exterior, people would be like, there's no way that you're struggling with panic and agoraphobia. I sure as heck was, because it was all of that fear that I took with me everywhere. I didn't want to panic. I would do anything to not have a panic attack. I had panic attacks all the time. Driving, going to school, like going out with friends, places I had been, like it didn't matter. It didn't matter where it was, what I was doing, like panic and fear was always there. So really the way that I like to explain it is agoraphobia is just that fear of feeling uncomfortable, having a panic attack, being stuck. And so you try to really keep yourself safe. You probably keep yourself within a certain zone, or you have like safety behaviors that you do. Like for myself, I would always reach out, like I need help. I need somebody to help me. I would call my mom. I would call my husband. We were dating at the time. But I would always look outside of myself, just like, how can I stop feeling this way? So that's really what agoraphobia is in a nutshell.
Yeah. And the safety behaviors, like you said, that you carried this fear with you everywhere you went, and that you didn't want to feel panic or have a panic attack in public spaces. Does that sound right? Because like that's
yeah, but I mean, I didn't want to have it anywhere. I would have them at home. Like I did not, it didn't, a lot of people, you feel more comfortable at home, but it's not to say you can't have panic at home. And I did. I had it everywhere. Like primarily for me in my car was the worst, because it was that feeling stuck, feeling trapped. Those sort of things really spiked anxiety and fear for me. Like being in a hair salon, like getting my hair done, being on an airplane, like any place that wasn't super easy to get out of.
Yes.
That's where panic was like.
I could totally see airplane just being an absolute nightmare. People without agoraphobia are scared of flying and being in those confined spaces. So that must have just been like kryptonite.
Exactly. And it's kind of like when you're working to recover, a lot of clients and students that I work with, it's kind of like the end goal for a lot of people is to get on an airplane, and it's sort of like the last thing. But it can be really, really scary, because of course it's like that ultimate, like you can't get off, like you are actually stuck. And for me, I say it's countless flights. I did them, but I hated it. And as soon as the door would close, it was like game over, like panic attack. I'd be grasping my husband's arm, like, and he would just look at me so lovingly, but just like, Shannon, there's nothing you can do about it now. And I'm like, I'm going to strangle you.
Yes.
But just that, it didn't have to be an airplane. I felt that way. Like I said, getting my hair done, sitting in classes, like, any place that I'm like, I'm stuck, I'm trapped, I can't get out. Like, what if I panic?
Was there anything that you did that was unhelpful during that time period that you thought was like keeping you safe any coping strategies or compulsions or anything like that you like, I have to do this before I go into this space so that I don't have a panic attack?
Yeah, like the list is kind of endless. A lot of people struggle with what's called anticipatory anxiety, and this was huge for me. So basically, you feel super anxious before you do the thing, like before you get in the car ride, before you go to the hair salon, all of that. So for me, I would always try to plan and figure out, if I do feel anxious, if I do have a panic attack, here's what I'll do. Or I would create like stopping points along my drive. I could stop here. Like a lot of what I did was trying to just fight the anxiety and make it go away and to not feel it. And so I would try to plan, problem solve, prepare, and I thought that these things were helpful. I thought that I was protecting myself and like getting control. But all of those things that I was doing was just keeping me on this hamster wheel of fear and anxiety. Because I was constantly telling my brain, something's wrong. Like, you are feeling anxious and you're just responding to it in this way of, we need to do something. You need to get out. You need to figure out. And so I would say that's like the biggest thing. Usually for many people, their biggest safety behavior is avoidance. Avoidance of their feelings, trying not to feel anxious, trying not to panic. And then the other big one, right, is trying to plan and problem solve and figure out, like, if I do this, if I do that, if I don't go here, I'll be safe, I'll be okay.
Let me into your mind on that. Let me into your mind on like a planning. Give me an example of like what would the planning look like?
Oh yeah, if I go now when it's less busy, maybe the roads won't be so bad. There won't be traffic. I won't really have a chance to get like even more stuck. Or if I just go by myself, a hard thing for a lot of people is feeling like you're not in control. And so I would experience anxiety and panic whether I was the driver or the passenger. For some people, it's like one or the other. But for me, it was like both. And if I had people with me, that was usually a lot harder because I felt like I don't want anyone to see it. I don't want to tell people like I have to pull over, or like I don't want to freak out in front of people. And so one of my big things is, if I plan this out so that I'm going by myself, or that if somebody is coming with me, I'm the driver and we're going somewhere that I'm familiar with and I'm not going on the highway. And, if it looks a certain way, it was all these just in cases that I would plan for. If it looks just this way, I'll probably be okay. So that was really the planning of like, how can I make adjustments so that I won't feel super anxious and maybe I won't have the panic.
Yes. Yeah. So you know what? It's so interesting as you're sharing this. And I think agoraphobia is, I don't know for sure, so people can fact check me on this, or you can correct me right now. I don't know if agoraphobia is like falls under the umbrella of OCD or is like a cousin to OCD, but like what you're talking about, it feels like there's a lot of commonalities between the two. And I'm realizing that with just the spectrum of anxiety disorders in general, is this just the theme that there's this desire for control. There's this also this desire not to feel anxious. In your particular case, a fear to not have a panic attack or have anybody see you have a panic attack. And then there's this desire to try to make things as certain, and I guess that's, component of control, but as certain as possible. Like if I do this and I do that, then everything should be good. And it's interesting. I'm noticing those correlations, and it's like our brain, I love what you say, because it's like you think that you're doing yourself a favor, but you're just signaling to your brain that something is wrong, something is out of balance, something is out of order, and you need to care about these thoughts that you're having. And that is what keeps you stuck, to your point, on the hamster wheel. Yeah.
It's so similar. There are so many similarities. Like a lot of people that I work with also have been diagnosed with OCD, and there are so many common themes. And really, like what you said, right at the crux of it is this unwillingness to feel uncomfortable. I don't want to
Yeah.
feel uncomfortable. I want everything to be within my control, and I want to know that I'm going to be okay.
Yeah.
And that's the really hard part, is because you don't leave any room for yourself to maybe drop some of that and actually see, like, maybe I don't have to have all the control. Maybe I don't have to do all the planning, and I'll actually be okay.
Yes.
And that's something for a long time. Like, I did not want to drop that because I thought that that was actually helping me. Like, I thought my planning, my preparing, like my problem solving, I thought all that stuff was helpful. And I would convince myself that it was helpful. Like, what if I don't do this? What if I don't have a plan? What if I don't figure it out? Like, what if I don't have, especially traveling and doing some of the bigger things, what if I don't have somebody with me and I have a panic attack and I really freak out and I can't handle it by myself? Like, all of these ways that I would try to make sure, like, in planning for all those just in cases, those what ifs.
Yeah.
Same, right? It keeps you on that. I've always got to do this to make sure, just to make sure. And like,
Yes.
It was a really hard lesson to learn once
Just
I
in
started
case.
to drop some of that. And once I learned to just let it be, I actually started to feel more in control. And it was like such a crazy realization, right? That like,
Yes.
I can drop some of this and I actually feel more peace. Like, wait, what?
So, I mean, you'll see me every now and again. I'm not looking down at my phone. I'm jotting down notes every time you say something that stands out to me. The just in cases, the what ifs, another just theme that I see with people that struggle with anxiety is, and then of course OCD, and now I'm learning agoraphobia, is like there's just this constant what if, these what if scenarios just going on and on and on. And what I've noticed with my anxiety, and it's so interesting you talking about letting go, and of course I want to dive into this here in a second, but for me, I learned the formula to learn how to live with intrusive thoughts that are associated with OCD. I want to hear about the formula for agoraphobia as well. I have to imagine it's somewhat similar to OCD as well. But it was weird. It was like I knew it for OCD, but then it was like I wasn't applying it in other areas of my life. One of the big ones being, so it's funny, we actually both started our businesses 3 years ago. So congratulations to us. Yeah.
Yes.
That's cool.
So cool.
Yeah, it is. I know when you said that, I was like, that's awesome. I have been living in the what if fear world with entrepreneurship and I'm huge on transparency on this podcast. I always want to keep it real with everybody. So the last 2 years, I mean, last year was the first year where I was like, something is off with how I'm operating. I'm always tense. I'm always stressed. I'm always anxious. I've got all these what ifs. And that was the first year I was like, I can't keep living like this. I don't care if this business fails. That was one of the big what ifs. Well, what if I don't do this work? If I don't do this thing, if I'm not always working, well, what if the business fails? What will I do then? And that fear was driving me so much to the point where I was burning myself out. And you talked about that release of, wow, if I actually release some of this control, oh, wow, I'm learning that the world doesn't come crashing down. That process started for me very slowly last year, and I've just continued to build on it. And I'm not perfect with it by any means. But I have felt more peace in the last year than I have in a long time. And I just feel like the skills that we learn when having to cope with anxiety can be applied to every aspect of life. That's another thing that I'm learning, and I just think that that's really cool. It's amazing.
It's so powerful. I'm so glad that you said that because it's so true. Like with my podcast, I actually have my students come on my podcast, and some of them, of course, have recovered and they share their stories. And it's like so funny because you would think that like I pay people to say this, but they're usually at the end like, I am so grateful that I went through this because it taught me so many skills.
Yes.
And so much about myself. And so many of these things have been so helpful in so many different aspects of my life. And it's just so true. Like, there are so many layers to recovery, and one of them is really like improving the relationship with yourself. And that's lifelong, right? And that work is so valuable. But back to what you kind of, I think where you were going, you know, a big part with panic disorder and agoraphobia really is about slowing down, like actually letting yourself slow down. Because I think so much of it is just on this, I've got to do, I've got to fix, I have to problem solve. And when you take a step back and you really realize that a lot of the recovery journey is about doing the opposite of what you've been doing, which is instead of doing, it's actually pausing more, slowing down, and letting yourself make decisions that aren't coming from a place of fear. Because when you're feeling so anxious, when you are like on the verge of a panic attack or having a panic attack, your instinct, right? Like your impulse is going to be protect, do, fix. Like, we need to do something. And why recovery is so stinking hard is because those pathways that you've built that are so used to doing and fixing from a place of fear, you have to slow that down and you have to start to undo that. And it's so hard because you also, on the flip side, you want to be able to do something to fix it. You're like, but I can't just slow down. Like, I can't just not do anything.
Right.
And there are, of course, tools. There are, of course, things that you can use. But I really, like, whenever I teach people in my programs and my one-on-one work, we really start with, you've got to slow down. You've got to start letting yourself actually feel this and resisting looking to all the ways that you're so used to making yourself or trying to make yourself not feel. Because that's really like what we're trying to do. We're trying to make ourselves not feel, and we can't. That's not possible.
This podcast is a magnet for whatever is sort of, it's so interesting. I feel like every conversation, it's just amazing how everything links up. What you just said, I want to expand on that because that is amazing. So I followed the holistic psychologist on Instagram. Not sure if you know who that is, but anyway, she does a great job talking about healing from trauma and some other things. But she had a post. Let me see. This was yesterday. Are you addicted to your own body's stress hormones? Signs you're running on cortisol. The body's stress response creates a chemical cocktail in the body. Norepinephrine, adrenaline, and cortisol are all released into the bloodstream. Our nervous system goes into a flight response, which looks like going and going, which is what you're talking about, with no end in sight. At the same time, dopamine, or the feel-good chemical, is released in the brain, encouraging us to repeat the stressful behaviors that led to more hits of dopamine. You're talking about the problem-solving brain, this brain that thinks that problem solving is doing, that everything has to be done, and that you have to do something about the anxiety. You have to do something about all these, maybe even like agoraphobia or OCD related, like in life, generally speaking. This is why so many people seemingly thrive in stressful situations. Picture the workaholic, the person with the high stress job, someone who's always in highly toxic relationships. When we're addicted to cortisol, rest actually feels uncomfortable, which you just talked about how sitting still is, it doesn't feel good at first when you're struggling with anxiety, and agoraphobia. And I can speak through the lens of OCD. It doesn't feel good. It feels very uncomfortable. She says, why? Because the body is in flight. We're tired from the stress and wired, ready for the threat. This is all subconscious, autonomic process. And basically what she goes on to say is, many of us don't even know we're addicted to this cycle because it's normal to us, or what we call life. We feel bored, empty, or in need of distraction when we're not stimulated by our stress response.
Yeah.
So I know I just went off on a tangent, but what you said is it's so accurate. It's like we're addicted to this problem solving. We feel the anxiety and we're like, we have to do something about it. We can't just sit with this. We want to numb ourselves out. We want to keep ourselves so busy that we don't have to think about the anxiety, again, for my case with the OCD, the intrusive thoughts, the depression, for you, the fear of having a panic attack. Like, so I don't know. I just find that really, really interesting. All of the overlap that exists in this space.
There's so much. And it feels so risky, right? I think for a lot of people, speaking to panic, agoraphobia, OCD, it feels risky to slow down. And I think just in general in life, like where we're at and all the things that we have going on, we're constantly stimulated. We're constantly being filled with information and things. And it's really hard for people in general to slow down. Yeah. And it's so important though, because when you start to slow down, you really start to notice all the ways in which you're trying to avoid feeling.
Yes.
And you start to see that it's not so risky because you actually start feeling some of the stuff that you're working so hard to feel. And I think something important that I want to mention though, this resistance that we have to slowing down.
Yeah.
It's totally natural. It makes so much sense, especially when you're feeling something uncomfortable. Like, I do not want to panic. I do not want these thoughts here. It's natural for us to push back against that. And that's especially when you're working to recover, it feels so hard because you're like, I am doing this stuff. Like, I'm slowing down and I'm trying. And when you start doing the work, it can be even more frustrating because you can start to have more thoughts and more feelings. And so people get really freaked out by that. And I know that I did. And it is kind of weird because you're like, nope, my brain's telling me this is not the right thing to be doing. Like, stop doing this. Like, go back to what you were doing before. And it's just that natural resistance that your brain has. This is something new. Our brains don't like new things. They like for things to be very much the same and repetitious. And so it takes that practice of slowing down and continuing to make decisions more out of a place of clarity rather than just, I've got to do something because I don't want to feel this way.
So with agoraphobia and panic attacks, I'm big on giving people a tangible little step that they can get from the podcast. How does one start to slow down? What does that actually look like? It sounds good. I know that it's going to feel uncomfortable for the listeners. I'm going to take whatever you say too. And I'm big on I like to experiment and try things out from what I learn on this podcast. So what does slowing down actually look like?
So I think it's always important when you start practicing things to not try to apply it when you're feeling really anxious.
Okay.
Because when we do this, our brains start to associate these things, right, with anxiety. I know for myself, I had so many tools and things thrown at me and I tried to do them all. It was okay, Shannon, here's these breathing techniques. Here's these grounding techniques. Here's all these things that you can do. And so when I felt anxious, I'd be like, all right, I need to do a breathing exercise. I need to count things and all the things. And my brain immediately was like, I know what you're doing. This is not helpful because you're just trying to so quickly fix this, take away these feelings. So it's very similar to fighting it. It's that you're putting more resistance to it.
Yeah.
So I always like to say when you're working on slowing down, actually practice just slowing down in your day-to-day life. Not really relating to anxiety, but just notice where am I rushing? Why am I rushing? Can I do this task or whatever I'm doing? Can I slow down? And maybe can I take some things off of my list? And maybe can I just put my focus on this one thing? And that can be a way that your brain starts to understand okay, we can slow down. We don't have to rush through everything and things don't need to be fast.
Yeah.
And then you can start applying some of it to when you feel anxious because your brain has already had some of this practice of slowing down and allowing yourself to be in stillness. So I was encouraged too, if you like reading, that's a good way to slow down. If you like just sitting, listening to music, let yourself be and not try to fill everything with information. And, I think we're so uncomfortable. We sit down and we pick up our phones or we turn on the TV, or
Yes.
it's like, can you just slow down? Something big for me, I'm a mom.
Yeah.
One of my most favorite ways to slow down and practice mindfulness, like slowing down really is mindfulness. I just play with my daughter, and I sit on the floor, play Legos with her, do different activities with her, and that I am able to slow down because I'm not on my phone, I'm not connected to anything, I'm just focused on the present moment. So that can be another easy, good way to slow down.
Yeah.
But when you're actually feeling anxious, slowing down looks like noticing when you're trying to speed things up, when you're trying to get away from the panic. You might be in the grocery store and you're like, oh gosh, I feel anxious. I am just going to get everything that I need to get as quick as I can so I can get out of here and make sure that I don't have a panic attack while I'm here.
Yeah.
And it's like, nope, okay, let me take a couple of breaths. I'm not talking about doing any crazy breathing exercises, just literally deep breath in through your nose, breathe out through your mouth. Do that a couple of times. Let yourself slow down. Okay, what am I here for? What do I need to get? We're just going to walk slowly. We're going to do this slowly. And I think when you do feel that wave of anxiety, it's so important. Just stop. Just stop. Pause, slow down wherever you are. Just literally stop. Because if you don't, you will always make that decision to do the things that aren't helpful, to try to fight it, to run, to I'm going back toward the exit, or I'm going to go back to my car, I'm going to go back home. When you just allow yourself to stop and feel what you're feeling from where you're feeling it, it's so helpful. Because when you actually give your brain that time to be oh, maybe this isn't something that we need to run from, that's huge. And your brain can be all right, this feels uncomfortable, but you're not doing anything about it. So it must mean that there's not any real danger. So, okay, we're staying. So, those are little ways that you can slow down. And I always encourage, when you're feeling anxious, just notice how you tend to respond and try to slow it down and really look at ways, how can I respond differently? How can I respond in a bit more of a healthy way to let myself feel it rather than trying to fight?
That makes literally so much sense to me. It makes so much sense to me because of what I've learned through exposure and response prevention with OCD. And a big part of it is they teach you, you want to act as if you might be heart pounding, super anxious while you're exposing yourself to something that scares you. And, my therapist always taught me, and then I've been very fortunate to have a lot of clinicians on the podcast. It's drop your shoulders, do what you would do if you were super relaxed and almost feeling lazy limbs, that's what my wife and I say, I've got lazy limbs today, just super relaxed. Nothing can bother you, even if you're feeling that fear, right? You're still feeling that fear, but you are signaling to your brain subconsciously through your body language that everything is okay. And what clicked for me with what you just said is that anxiety does, I think, have a tendency to, it causes us to rush. And that rushing comes in a lot of different forms. I love the example that you used at the grocery store. I'm feeling anxious in here. I'm afraid that I'm going to have a panic attack. Let me grab everything that I need really, really quickly and get the hell out of here before this happens. Okay, so you go through that motion. You get out of the grocery store and you go, okay, right. I'm out of the grocery store. No panic attack. I'm safe. And this is what, again, tying it back to OCD, somebody has an intrusive thought and then they compulse and they go, they have that temporary relief and they go, oh my gosh, I feel so much better. Thank God. That fear that I thought was going to happen, that panic attack that I thought was going to happen, that intrusive thought that I thought was going to come real. Thank God. I rushed, I did my compulsion, or I rushed through the grocery store and I got out the other side and now I'm safe. But it's at the detriment of signaling to your brain that that's the behavior that you need to do when you feel this emotion, because if you don't, then something bad is going to happen.
Yeah.
And
it's that idea, right? You have to run. You've got to run all the time.
Yeah. And that cycle just feeds itself over and over and over again. And I'm, again, in the spirit of transparency, I feel like I find my natural speed in life to be rushing because of the anxiety, and I have to deliberately slow myself down and feel uncomfortable, because slowing down for me naturally feels very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because if I'm rushing and I'm doing, my brain thinks I'm in that I'm in control. And then I can logically convince myself, oh, well, look at XYZ when, you have to rush, because when you do, like, clearly this is how you get things done. And it's like challenging that is what you're talking about. And the first way that you can do that is so simple, just by slowing down. So I really appreciate you sharing that. Was there anything that you did at the start that wasn't helpful, that kept you stuck? I mean, obviously rushing, it sounds like, would probably be one of them. Anything else?
Trying to force myself to recover, like trying to force myself to heal. I did so many things. Like, it wasn't just the fixing of anxiety, right, on a day-to-day. It wasn't just fixing the not panicking. It was the day-to-day, like, I need to get better. I need to heal, and I need to force myself to be at a certain point. And a lot of times I would have that comparison of, I want to get back to the Shannon that I used to be, the Shannon that didn't struggle with this. Like, I need to get back there. I need to live my life. I need to do all these things. And that is one of the things that I see people trying to do so much, is just trying to force it. And it's really hard, because it makes sense. You want to force it. You want to feel better. You want to get better. You don't want to be struggling. But when you try to force, it makes everything so much harder. This is part of, like, right, trying to rush and, like, just get better. And unfortunately, it's such a journey, and you need to see it as that. And it's not some finish line. Like, I always tell people, I have no idea when I actually recovered. Like, I can give you a year. I have no idea otherwise, because it's not like I woke up one morning and just, it was all gone. Like, it happened slowly over time. And the more I put the focus on the present moment, like that day, what can I do today? What's a small step that I can take today? And I'm not focused on the outcome. Like, I know it's hard not to focus on the outcome, because you want to be free of it. You don't want to struggle anymore. But the more you put your focus on that, the more it takes your focus away from the stuff that you can actually be doing that's going to be helpful and supportive. So although you want to try to force it, you can't. This is a huge part of why slowing down is so important. Like, not having timelines, not having deadlines. Like, I need to get better by this point. I need to be able to do this. Letting it happen, it will happen the less that you try to force.
You're saying so many things that I'm just like, this is so important for everybody here, myself included, because it's even like you talk about it, and it is. And that was one thing for me that had to be a mental shift. I'm in recovery. I have OCD. It is not all, I always say it's not all of who I am. It is a part of who I am. And I am trying to walk in my version of recovery every single day. And that needing to get back to a specific place in time, absolutely had that dialogue, especially at the start. I want Zach's old brain back. I'm going to go do this exposure and response prevention therapy so that I can get my old brain back and get back to how I used to be. And it's so interesting. And again, these concepts, I feel I'm learning more and more, can be applied in all aspects of life to create more peace. But we create so much friction, don't we, through forcing. I don't want to feel this emotion, so I'm going to do X, Y, Z to get rid of that emotion. That's, in a sense, again, signaling to your brain that something's out of balance, or that there's a problem that needs to be fixed, and we're kind of forcing it. And a big part of my recovery journey, if I could now start to articulate it, it's been this slow process of letting go. Letting go, though, again, Shannon, and like, this is why I always want to be so honest with everybody, is with everything. Not just the intrusive OCD thoughts and needing to know whether they'll come true or not, or needing to know that I'll never feel anxiety or depression again, or like everything. letting go of the need to know that this business is going to be successful, that the relationship with my wife is going to go the distance, a lifelong relationship, which is my, obviously my hope, but letting go of everything. And I'm not there. I haven't arrived. I have not arrived. This has been a journey for me, but I really, really love what you just said about forcing recovery. And then I wrote it down, needing to get back to some version of yourself prior to quote unquote all of the shit that you're struggling with now, and thinking through that lens of people that are in that spot right now, desiring to just get back to that old place. And it's like, that is signaling to your brain that just something is out of balance, and that's, you need to be fixed or you're broken. And then that creates tension and conflict.
Yeah. I love that you just said that, because I think we make anxiety, we make our struggles part of our identity, and we convince ourselves that we are broken, that there's something wrong with us, that we need to be fixed. And I always tell people, I don't care what it is that you're struggling with. You don't need the fixing. Your relationship with anxiety needs the fixing. It has nothing to do with you. So I always encourage, when people say this, and you just said it, so I'm going to call you out a little bit. But
yes, please
when
do.
people say, this is part of who I am, I call bullshit. I call
like
bullshit.
That. I like that.
I do not think that, if the people closest to you in your life were to describe you, I don't think that they would be like, oh yeah, Shannon, I know Zach. He's great. He is ambitious and he's smart and he's creative, but he's like full of OCD. He's just a really, nobody would say that, right? So the way that we define ourselves is so important, because you are not, this is like one of my biggest missions, is for people to stop saying, I'm an anxious person, or hi, I'm Zach and I have OCD. Cool. It does not make you who you are in any way. So you're not an anxious person. You're not this, overthinker, this person that don't allow it to have that power over you, because when you give yourself these messages of, I'm just an anxious person, this is how it's always going to look for me, it does start to change your actions and behaviors. It changes how you approach life and how you approach your struggles. So making that separation of, I'm struggling with anxiety. I am not just an anxious person. And, I hear this daily. I used to say it. I've always been anxious. I've just always been this way. And there really wasn't a whole lot of truth to it. We look back, and I think our memory is not as good as we think, and we often fantasize. We make it seem like, going back, I want to go back to who I was. Well, was that former version of yourself that great? Because I know going back to 13, 14, 15, I don't want to go back there. That Shannon wasn't awesome. So it's not that you want to go back. It's
middle
that you
school,
don't want to struggle.
some rough years.
Right.
Rough middle school and early high school. I could just block those years out. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Never relive that again. But, this is part of life and part of the recovery journey that's so valuable, is those pieces that were there, they're still within you. The person that can experience lots of freedom, lots of peace, doesn't have all these thoughts, that person is still there. I always say I was always adventurous. I still am. It just is easier now. It looks better than it used to. But those pieces, they've always been within me. And when I really dropped this bullshit story of, I'm just an anxious person, this is who I am, and it's just a part of me, and it's who I'm always going to be. I have family members, everyone, all these people in my life have always struggled. When I dropped that stuff, it was whoa, I gave myself so much permission to just be Shannon, who is pretty awesome, because all of this stuff, not anything to do with anxiety.
Yes. I think that and I really appreciate you pointing that out, because I want to be cautious in how I say this, because I also don't want to trigger anybody. It's like the whole what you believe. It's like the whole what you think is what you believe, and what you believe becomes your actions. You know how they do that, and I remember seeing that though when I was struggling with intrusive thoughts, and that really freaking me out. What you think becomes your actions, what your actions become. So I'm butchering it, but people get the gist. You understand what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
From that, though, is some truth in terms of how you identify yourself as. And those identifications that you have for yourself, those identities they're derived from a belief system that you have about yourself. And then once those belief systems are baked in, they start to become a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so I really appreciate you pointing this out, because I always tell people in the OCD world, like, when you say, my OCD thoughts are so horrible being the key word there, you signal to your brain that some words are okay and some are not. So I want to take some time to unpack for myself, what are the belief systems that I'm carrying around about Zach with OCD and anxiety and some of these other things that could be perpetuating actions, knowing or unknowingly. I got to unpack that. I'm big, as you know, as you're learning, I am big on, I just like to learn, and I'm open to new ideas. That's interesting, though, for the listener to think about, too. What are the beliefs that are sort of driving our behavior?
Yeah. I mean, I love that you're using the word belief, because I think it can be triggering and it can be like, oh, gosh. So it's not that your thoughts, create your reality. Like, really, thoughts are just thoughts. And a lot of times we have really silly, meaningless, really just our brains, they're human brains. They think of a lot of like silly, crazy things. But, it's not that your thoughts make your reality, but your beliefs, like what you believe about yourself, that really does shape like how you move and how you respond to things. And so I think it's just so important. Give yourself permission to be who you are without attaching anxiety to that definition. Like, you're never going to introduce yourself and say, hi, I'm Shannon. I struggle immensely with panic and agoraphobia. Like, no. Yeah. I mean, you're going to tell people about you, and it's not going to include anxiety.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny when you use that example. It's like that'd feel a little awkward if that's how you introduce yourself. Hi, I'm Zach, and I'm constantly anxious. Let me tell you about my anxiety. And even like a belief system of, because anxiety runs in my family. So there you go. It's something that we talk about in my house or in my family now, because I've been doing that advocacy work now for a couple of years. But that's interesting. I really want to unpack that more with myself, and I think it's a good exercise. Do you have an exercise that you do with clients of yours to help them unpack some unhelpful belief systems that they might have about themselves? Anything that you do, anything tangible that a listener could take away from this conversation?
Yeah, so I think I'd love to just share this insight, because I think sometimes insights are even more helpful than like practical, tangible things. Like sometimes, yes, the practical, tangible things are really helpful. But with stuff like this, I think it's more important to start shifting the way that you are mentally approaching some of this stuff. And so, for me as a child, I can tell you, my uncle struggled immensely with panic, OCD. My grandfather, my great-grandmother was severely agoraphobic. My mom struggled with panic and agoraphobia. And so growing up, I really thought, like when I got diagnosed with severe panic disorder and agoraphobia, I remember leaving the psychiatrist that day and thinking, this is the rest of my life. Like, what am I going to do? And I really felt like, who am I? Like, how did I get here? And I remember going through all that stuff of like, maybe I am just screwed because of my family, and maybe this is just genetic. But even with everything that I knew, like, I don't know all of my family's stories, right? But like my mom, whom I'm super close to, struggled with panic and agoraphobia. But looking back, there was a really good reason why she struggled with panic and agoraphobia. And I think typically if you can look back, you can sort of see and understand why you struggle with what you do. And for me, a big part of it was my upbringing, my childhood home. I didn't have a lot of control. I had one parent who was just very volatile behavior, like unpredictable, not emotionally there. And so for me, seeing that, it was more of a learned behavior for me to try to protect myself, for me to try to feel safe all the time, for me to try to like, let me just be here. And like, I don't want any of this to happen. I don't want anything to feel outside of my control. And that's when I started like, grasping at control in every way that I could. So instead of seeing it as being like, maybe this is genetic and maybe I'm just screwed, maybe what are some of the factors in your life that have been, either through learned experiences or experience as a child? And I'm not saying you have to go all the way back there and unpack that. Because that's a whole nother thing that we could get into in a separate discussion at some point. But it's really understanding like, okay, it makes sense why I'm struggling with this. And I don't need to go all the way back and I don't need to unpack all this stuff. But how can I continue to work on my relationship with anxiety? How can I continue to let go of some of this control, let go of some of these beliefs? And so I always challenge people. I think it's less about genetics, and I think it's a lot more about learned behaviors, and it's more about your experiences growing up. Like a lot of us weren't taught how to feel our emotions. We weren't in safe environments to feel our emotions. The behaviors weren't modeled for us in a really good way. Or for some people, you just had a panic attack and it scared the shit out of you. And then you got this really big attachment to, I don't want to feel that ever again. So sometimes it's not like, there's no like genetic stuff. It's not even that up for that. It's just, it was really scary and I don't ever want to feel that again. So I was encouraged, don't think that you have to do all this like unpacking, going all the way back and like, I've got to, no, it's more about, okay, it makes sense. And how can I change my relationship with anxiety now? How can I start to approach this in a healthier way?
Yeah. And that's the relationship with anxiety that I jotted down earlier. What I will say, and this kind of stuck out to me, is the example that you used when you said, like agoraphobia runs in my family and I'm just screwed. Like, this is just how it's going to be for the rest of my life. I think because, again, I can't speak for agoraphobia. I can only speak to OCD. I can talk to somebody in Southeast Asia, speaks a different language from a different culture, and they can come to me with sexually intrusive thoughts, as an example of a subtype. And I can literally say back to them as if I'm in their brain, are these the thoughts you're having? Is this what's like when you have this thought, then does this thought happen next? Does this thought happen next? So I think, at least for the OCD community, I believe that there is a genetic component to it. But to your point about that sentence, and this doesn't mean that your life is screwed and you're going to suffer forever. And I think that that's the big point that you're trying to message to people is like, let's not get so hung up on, like, if the belief system is this is always run in my family, it's genetic, therefore I am screwed for life, or I'm going to have this for life. And what people don't realize is that a hidden secret belief attached to that is and suffer. Like this is genetic and therefore I am going to suffer. And maybe that's not even what they're saying. Maybe they're saying something like me where it's like, I have OCD. I struggle with OCD, even that, like signaling to your brain that is something that you're going to struggle with for life. And what you're trying to do is get people untangled from, hey, wait a minute, time out. This is not a life sentence. This is not something that you have to struggle with for the rest of your life. There's so much more to this. There's a path to recovery. And you tied it back in with the relationship with anxiety. And I think that overlap it also exists in the OCD community, the whole process. And that's what I wanted to ask you about now. And I also want to be respectful of your time. I can see that we have just been chit-chatting away here. So you let me know how much time you have left.
It's okay.
Okay. Is the relationship with the anxiety and for us, the intrusive thought. So I have to imagine that changing your relationship with the fear of having a panic attack can also be really helpful. But what is I guess the sort of the golden standard, if you will, or the process to get untangled from agoraphobia?
Yeah, it's very similar with OCD, right? Is you really have to take uncomfortable action, really resist doing the things that you feel like are going to be helpful, and really pay attention. Like, what are these things? How can I work to, have a different response? Your response is always the most important thing, right? Like, whether you feel anxious or whether you're on a verge of a panic attack, like, it's a really important. This is why we talked about slowing down, having a healthy response to that stuff. Because that's always, I don't care if you have the panic attack. I don't care if it looks horrendous. None of that matters. It's how you respond to it. So, of course, a big element of recovering from agoraphobia is allowing yourself to feel uncomfortable, like working up your tolerance for feeling discomfort and not doing all those things to try to keep yourself safe and try to make sure that nothing happens. Like, allowing yourself to see, I can actually handle it. And these things that I think are helping me to handle it or actually doing it for me are not. Because none of those things, I don't care what it is that you've ever used. A lot of people, water bottle, safe person, gum, sour candies, oils, like all these things that we use, avoidance, we think that those are the things that help us to get through. You've always worked through every anxious moment, every panic attack. You've always gotten through it, whether you've had these things, whether you've used them, whether you've been with somebody. Like, nobody and nothing can work through the feelings for you. You've always done it. So it's just really important to recognize, like, when creating this healthy relationship with anxiety, right, you're creating a healthy relationship with yourself, actually allowing yourself to put the trust back in you, back in your body, and not outside of yourself. And so, yeah, panic and agoraphobia is really, like, I don't want to say it's all just about working up your tolerance for discomfort and feeling uncomfortable and facing the things. It's a big part of it, but it's not all of it. There's also the other side of recovery that's like, how can I improve this relationship with myself? And a lot of that work is self-compassion. Like, how can I change the dialogue? How can I start to uncover some of these beliefs and create new beliefs? How can I write new stories that make sense for my life? Like, how can I improve the relationships? Maybe how can I change some of my habits, like my lifestyle habits? There's so many pieces of recovery. And I think one of the big misconceptions is I don't ever want people to think you recover from panic and agoraphobia by just getting out and facing the hard stuff. There's so much more to it than that. And you cannot make it that simple. It's not that simple. I wish it were. If it were, I would have recovered a long time ago.
Yeah. So can you share, I mean, I want to be respectful of your time, but can you share, just outside of building up a tolerance for me, like, if this is an example that comes to mind, using the grocery store. If you have a fear of having a panic attack in a grocery store, building up tolerance for that would be going into that grocery store, feeling the rush of fear and anxiety coming along with that, and then staying in that grocery store for a longer period of time than, for example, you would maybe plan to stay in there. Is that an example of building up tolerance? Can you give an example of how you build up tolerance, and then can you dive into some of the other aspects of recovery for people?
Yeah. So building up your tolerance might not look for you like going into the grocery store by yourself. Like, that might not be the second, third, or even fourth step for you. It might be, just allowing yourself to walk outside of your house and get in your car and just sit in your car. Like, because for a lot of people, you avoid just even going places and doing things. So your first step for building up tolerance might be just go sit in your car. And if you feel like it's not super manageable for you to do it by yourself, do it with somebody. Do it with somebody that you trust, somebody that you feel, if you have a safe person. I think we all hear these messages of you need to do it on your own and you can't rely on other people and you can't use your safe person. And it's just like, no, that's not right. Like, you can use your safe person maybe the first few times, and then you feel like, okay, maybe I can do this by myself. So with like the store example, it might be, I take my mom with me and my mom comes into the store and, I allow myself to actually like feel the feelings when I feel them, and I don't immediately run. I like let myself slow down, and I'm going to stay in the grocery store and I'm going to try to like, work my way toward the back, like allow myself to actually feel. And maybe that's the first few times. And then after that, it's okay, Mom, come with me, but maybe you can just stay in the car and I can go in and just see, like, don't have really any expectations, but like maybe I'll just go get something, so it's just slow, those small steps of like working up that tolerance. It never has to be just force yourself. I think the more forcing you do, the more things you're going to be like white knuckling your way through everything, which isn't super helpful. So building up your tolerance can look different. It really is super, like, with OCD, it's very specific to what your fears are, what your struggles are, and like making a plan that is specific to you and will be most helpful to you. Because what's helpful to one person might be very much not helpful to another. So that's just like a small way that you can work up your tolerance. I'm sorry, I totally lost sight of your other question.
Other parts of the healing process outside of, and I appreciate you giving that tangible example, by the way. In terms of the tolerance.
I think I want to stick to panic attacks because I think that this is like this is kind of what we centered the conversation around. So kind of some big things that I love for people to recognize with panic attacks. You can't stop them. Don't try to stop them. I think this is one of the biggest things, right? We're feeling super anxious. We have a lot of thoughts. You have a lot of feelings and you're like, oh shit, please make this not happen. And so you try to make it not happen and you really can't stop it. You really can't even stop yourself from feeling anxious. So it's so much more important just to like slow down, let yourself feel it. Like it's okay. Know it feels uncomfortable. Something that I loved telling myself all the time. This discomfort that I'm feeling doesn't equal danger. Like that was so helpful for me because the feelings feel so dangerous. But when you really acknowledge, okay, I'm feeling super uncomfortable, but these feelings do not mean that I'm in danger. Like I always found that to be helpful. Yeah. Another thing with panic attacks, it's okay if you have them. Like I think we get so caught up in if I have a panic attack, it means I'm not healing. Or if I have a panic attack, it means I'm 10 steps back. It doesn't actually mean any of that. Like, just let yourself have panic attacks. And of course, a big one, like, do your best to actually allow yourself to feel uncomfortable and maybe have a panic attack and stop resisting trying to not have a panic attack. Like, when you hold back, right, and you're like, I'm not going to let myself go there, your brain is always going to fill in the blanks with the worst case scenario stuff. Like, don't do that because you might pass out. You might fill in the blank. And when you actually let yourself do it, you can see what it looks like. And it's never like the stories that are going on in your head. And another thing I would say about panic attacks is if you're like always looking outside of yourself to get you through panic attacks, you are giving all that trust, all that power away from yourself. Like allow yourself to look inward within yourself, not reach for all the things, not do all the things, and like actually let yourself see you can handle it. You've always handled it. And allowing yourself to panic is not going to send you into a place that you can't get out of. Like you're never going to have a panic attack that's so bad that you won't be able to get out of it. But if you're always trying to prevent yourself from feeling and not have a panic attack, that's when you're going to run into the biggest problems. So like, and I also too think with panic attacks, like they don't mean anything. Really try to resist going down the rabbit holes of why. Why did I have a panic attack? This sucks. I can't believe it happened. Like, it's okay. It's okay that it happened. Like, it's okay. You don't need to do any digging. Like, just what can you do now? Like, it doesn't matter. It happened. It's okay. Like, no beating yourself up. Yeah. Let's just put our focus back on the work and, like, we know what to do. So those are just a few things.
Acceptance is the word that comes to mind. Like, there's acceptance there with, yeah, I had a panic attack. Like, I would have preferred not to, but it's fine. Like, it's no big deal. I can just, like, move forward from this. There's, like, it's kind of like what they teach us in ERPs. Like, you can just shrug your shoulders and like, yeah, I had that thought. Like, it's fine. It doesn't need to define me. There was something you said, it was like something like this anxiety or this discomfort I'm feeling doesn't mean like
doesn't equal danger. Yeah.
Overlap there again with the OCD. Like, these intrusive thoughts don't equal danger.
Yep.
And I think that's really helpful. Yeah. It's really helpful.
It's so helpful because the feelings will always feel dangerous. The thoughts feel dangerous. Like, it all feels so scary. But it's like when you really slow it down, I know we've been here so many times before. I've felt this so many times. I know that this is not dangerous, but like also too, you can't just talk logic, with the thoughts. You can't just talk logic. Like, we're fine. Nothing, this isn't bad. This is no, but just recognizing like these feelings feel really awful, but this doesn't mean that I'm in danger. That's just really, I always loved it and thought that was a really helpful thing.
I think that's really helpful. And I also thought it was helpful. Gosh, now I'm blanking on what you said. It was, it came, it was there, and then it just left like a cloud in the sky. Well, you said earlier, maybe this is what it was, just that thoughts are thoughts, that they don't have any inherent meaning, that they can just come and go as you please. Like it's how we choose to latch onto them that starts to create our suffering in a lot of ways. And our discomfort.
Yeah. And it's really hard, right, to detach from that. But it's so powerful when you do. And just letting yourself, I always say, let yourself be human. Like, let yourself be human. Like, there are so many things that are going to be hard, and you're going to want to, like, analyze and beat yourself up and try to force and fix, and like instead just work on letting yourself be human. And you're not always going to get it quote right, and you're not always going to do the most helpful thing, and that's okay. Like, that's all part of the process and part of life in general. Like, when you let yourself be human, and you don't have to be perfect, and it can look messy and it can look a hot mess, it's so freeing.
It really is. And it came back to me, I've been here before. Such a powerful statement. I've been here before. I've experienced panic attacks before, and here I am. I've felt the fear of having a panic attack, and here I am, and building that trust inside of yourself that, like, no, I'm capable of being able to handle this. Like, I can do it. And that trust is another thing that comes up a lot in my podcast interviews. Is building self-trust is so huge, I think, in the recovery process, that that you've got tools in your tool belt that you can always tap into. And I just think it's so powerful. I've been here before, like, and here I am, like, I'm still standing, I'm still alive. I'm here. Like, I've done it before. I can do it again. I can figure this out. And so I really like that. I think that's important for people to understand and to build that foundation. So I'm grateful that you said that. Yeah.
And remember too, right? The biggest, best, most powerful tool you have in your tool belt is you. Like, that's what I always lost sight of. I was always looking to other people, other things. Somebody's got the answer, somebody's got the fix, and I didn't invest in myself. And, if I could hit rewind, that's one of the biggest things that I'd go back and do, is like actually listen to Shannon and actually put the trust in her and not put it in all the other things and all the other people.
So with that in mind, because I think that's an excellent line to end on there for the podcast. Is there any other advice, though? Anything else that you think we should touch on for anybody listening who struggles with agoraphobia or panic attacks? Anything else that you think they should know?
I would just say it's not a life sentence. I know you might not believe it right now. I know that you might not feel it. You might really be convinced otherwise. And I just want you to have some blind faith that you can recover. You don't need to believe it. You don't need to believe that it's possible. You just have to believe that it's necessary and that you want to, because you have really big reasons why you want to. And put your focus on that stuff. Like, why do you want to recover? Why are you working so hard? I'm sure you have big, amazing things that you want to do in life. And, reminding yourself of that stuff will keep you moving forward when it's really hard. But just, you're doing an amazing job. And what you're struggling with is so freaking hard. And remember, give yourself credit. You are doing an amazing job, and it's okay that you're where you're at. This is not what the rest of your journey has to look like.
Those are powerful words. Where can people connect with you, Shannon?
Yeah, I'm primarily living over on Instagram at A Healthy Push. That's my website, my podcast. So you can find me in all the places, A Healthy Push.
Okay, A Healthy Push, everybody. Shannon, this was a great conversation. I really appreciate you giving some time to the You're Not Alone podcast. And
Yeah.
you had some really valuable insights to share. And it's like what you said during the interview, insights are so powerful. So I'm grateful for you. I'm glad that you're out here educating people, and that you've found your purpose in this work. So thank you again for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, you're so welcome. I've enjoyed it so much.